Family, can we talk for a moment? Because I feel in my spirit that somebody in this room or maybe watching online has been holding on to something that's been holding them back. You've been praying about it, crying over it, asking God to change it. But the truth is, God has already given you the strength to release it. See, the enemy doesn't always come through an attack. Sometimes he shows up as a memory, as an attachment, as a what if. But I came to declare today that you are not your past. You are not bound to the weight of what left you, what disappointed you. The longer you hold on, the longer you delay what God is trying to release in your life. I know letting go isn't easy, but freedom requires force. You've got to push past the emotions, push past the fear, push past the idea that if you let go, you'll lose yourself, when in reality, that's the only way you'll find yourself. So today, I dare you to force yourself to let go, because God is waiting on you to start living the life he's been calling you to all along. Amen. Let's go deeper. Letting go is an act of faith that requires trust in God's plan, even when it doesn't align with our expectations. Many times we hold on to things, people, and situations out of fear of loss, fear of the unknown, fear of what life will look like if we release what has been familiar for so long. But faith was never meant to be built on familiarity. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, which means that when God calls us to let go, he is calling us into a deeper level of trust. When Abraham was called to leave his homeland, he had no roadmap, no guarantee, no details, just a word from God. And yet he moved. That's what faith looks like. It's not about knowing what comes next. It's about trusting that the one who called you knows exactly where he's leading you. The problem is we often want to see the whole picture before we take the first step. We want assurances, confirmations, and proof that what we're walking into is better than what we're leaving behind. But God doesn't operate on human logic. His ways are higher, his thoughts are greater, and his plans stretch beyond our comprehension. That's why letting go feels so hard. It's because we're relying on our own understanding instead of surrendering to his wisdom. There are moments in life when God will start making what you once held on to uncomfortable. The relationships that used to bring joy start feeling strained. The job you once loved starts to feel draining. The habits that used to comfort you no longer satisfy. This isn't by accident. It's God's way of showing you that what you're holding on to is no longer aligned with where he's taking you. But instead of recognizing the shift, many of us fight it. We pray for things to go back to the way they were. We try to force what's fading to stay alive, and in doing so, we resist the very process that's designed to move us forward. Faith isn't just about believing for blessings. It's about trusting God when he starts subtracting things from your life. When he removes certain people, closes certain doors, or takes you out of certain places, it's not because he's punishing you, it's because he's protecting you. We cry over closed doors without realizing that if they had stayed open, they would have led us into places that were never meant for us. We grieve over relationships that ended without seeing that God was saving us from heartbreak down the road. We struggle to release what feels comfortable, not realizing that comfort can sometimes be the very thing keeping us from stepping into purpose. Think about the Israelites when they were delivered from Egypt. They had prayed for freedom, cried out to God for deliverance, and yet when the journey got difficult, they longed to return to what they knew. They were free, but they still had a slave mentality. That's what happens when we hold on to things God is trying to release us from. We may physically step into something new, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, we are still attached to the old. Letting go is not just about leaving a place or a person. It's about releasing the mindset that keeps us bound to what no longer serves us. Sometimes we hold on to things because we think they define us. We attach our identity to relationships, positions, or achievements, and when God calls us to release them, we feel like we are losing a part of ourselves. But your identity is not in what you have, who you're connected to, or what you've accomplished. Your identity is in Christ. If you define yourself by anything outside of him, you will always struggle to let go when he asks you to. The truth is, God will strip away anything you have placed above him, not because he wants to hurt you, but because he wants to heal you. He knows that anything you idolize has the potential to become a stronghold, and he loves you too much to let you be bound by something he never intended for you. Letting go also requires us to confront our fear of being alone. Many times we stay in situations longer than we should because we don't want to feel abandoned. We hold on to toxic relationships because we fear loneliness. We cling to dead-end jobs because we fear instability. But God is not just a provider, he is a sustainer. When he asks you to let go, he is not leaving you empty. He is making room for something greater. We fear being left with nothing. But faith reminds us that with God, we always have everything we need. Faith demands action. It's not just about believing that God has something better. It's about being willing to release what is in your hands so that he can place something greater in them. You can't receive new blessings if your hands are still full of the past. You can't walk into new opportunities if you're still carrying the weight of old disappointments. You can't step into the future if you're still holding on to what's behind you. Sometimes the hardest part of letting go is the uncertainty. What if things don't work out? What if I never find better? What if I regret my decision? But faith doesn't operate on what ifs. Faith says, even if I don't understand, I trust God. Faith says, even if I can't see the next step, I'll take it. Faith says, even if I have to walk away from everything I've known, I believe that God has something greater ahead. The moment you decide to let go, you activate a different level of faith. It's a faith that no longer relies on circumstances, but on the character of God. It's a faith that says, I trust you even when it hurts. I trust you even when I don't have all the answers. I trust you even when I feel like I'm losing everything. That kind of faith moves mountains. That kind of faith shifts atmospheres. That kind of faith opens doors that no man can shut. Letting go isn't about weakness, it's about strength. It takes strength to walk away from something you've invested in. It takes strength to release what you thought would last forever. It takes strength to say, God, I don't understand, but I trust you. Faith isn't passive, it's active. And when you choose to step out in faith, when you choose to let go, you position yourself for the next level of what God has for you. Emotional baggage delays destiny because it keeps us tied to what God has already called us to move beyond. Many people are walking around carrying things in their hearts that were never meant to be permanent. They carry wounds from past relationships, disappointments from failed dreams, resentment from betrayals, and guilt from mistakes. All of this weight slows them down, making it difficult to embrace what God has ahead. We often pray for open doors, breakthroughs, and elevation, but we don't realize that God cannot release us into our next season if we are still clinging to the burdens of our past. There are things God has planned for your life that you will never step into if you continue holding on to the things he has told you to let go of. Imagine trying to run a race while carrying heavy suitcases. The weight would slow you down, make you tired, and eventually wear you out to the point where you can't keep going. That is exactly what happens when you hold on to emotional baggage. It drains your energy, distracts your focus, and distorts your perspective. You start seeing life through the lens of your pain instead of through the lens of God's promises, You start making decisions based on fear instead of faith. You start expecting disappointment instead of believing in God's goodness. This is why so many people feel stuck. It's not that God hasn't given them opportunities. It's that they are too burdened to seize them. God cannot fill hands that are already full. If you are holding on to old hurts, there is no space for new healing. If you are holding on to past failures, there is no space for fresh victories. If you are holding on to toxic relationships, there is no space for divine connections. The enemy knows that as long as you remain tied to your past, you will never fully step into your future. That's why he keeps reminding you of what went wrong, who hurt you, and what you lost. He wants you to stay trapped in cycles of overthinking, replaying old conversations, and holding on to bitterness. But what he doesn't want you to know is that the longer you hold on to those things, the longer you delay what God is trying to bring into your life. Think about the children of Israel. God had promised them the land of Canaan, a land flowing with milk and honey. But what should have been an 11-day journey turned into a 40-year delay. Why? Because they carried emotional baggage from Egypt. They were free physically, but mentally they were still enslaved. They doubted God's provision, complained when things got hard, and longed for the very place God had delivered them from. Their inability to release the past kept them wandering in the wilderness far longer than necessary. Many of us are in a similar position. God has prepared something greater for us, but because we are still holding on to the pain of yesterday, we remain stuck in cycles that delay our destiny. Unresolved emotions create roadblocks in our spiritual journey. Sometimes we think we have moved on, but deep down we are still carrying resentment, unforgiveness, or regret. These hidden burdens affect the way we respond to life. They make us suspicious of people who mean well. They make us reject good things because we are afraid they won't last. They make us sabotage opportunities because we assume they will fail just like before. Emotional baggage doesn't just slow us down, it shapes our perspective. And if we are not careful, it can cause us to reject the very blessings God is trying to give us. One of the greatest deceptions of emotional baggage is that we think holding on to it protects us. We believe that if we remember every painful moment, we won't get hurt again. If we keep our guard up, no one will be able to betray us. If we dwell on past failures, we won't make the same mistakes. But in reality, holding on to pain doesn't protect us, it imprisons us. It keeps us locked in a state of fear, preventing us from experiencing the fullness of what God has for us. God never designed us to carry burdens alone. That's why Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest." But many times, instead of giving our burdens to God, we carry them ourselves. We replay situations in our minds, trying to figure out what we could have done differently. We hold on to grudges, thinking they will somehow bring us justice. We keep looking back, wondering what could have been. But all this does is delay our progress. God is saying, lay it down, release it. Trust me to handle it. But instead of trusting, we cling to the weight, not realizing that we are only hurting ourselves in the process. There are things God wants to do in your life that require a lighter heart. You cannot receive new relationships if you are still bitter about the old ones. You cannot step into new opportunities if you are still doubting your worth. You cannot experience real joy if you are still carrying the sadness of yesterday. Emotional baggage is heavy, but it is not yours to carry. God is calling you to release it because He knows that your destiny is too great for you to be weighed down by things that no longer serve you. Some people struggle to let go of emotional baggage because they feel like it validates their pain. They think that if they release the hurt, it means what happened to them didn't matter. But releasing something doesn't mean it wasn't real. It simply means you refuse to let it control your future. There is power in saying, I acknowledge what happened, but I will not let it define me. There is power in deciding that your future is more important than your past. When God calls you to something greater, He also calls you to leave behind anything that hinders you. Abraham had to leave his father's house. Joseph had to let go of the betrayal of his brothers. David had to move past being overlooked. Even Jesus had to endure rejection on His way to fulfilling His purpose. There is no destiny without release. There is no future without surrender. God is always ready to take you higher, but the question is, are you willing to let go of what's holding you down? Fear of the unknown keeps you stuck because it convinces you that what is ahead is more dangerous than what is behind. It whispers doubts, plants insecurities, and keeps you locked in a cycle of overthinking. You start questioning whether you are making the right decision, whether you are truly hearing from God, whether you are capable of handling what comes next. This fear becomes so strong that instead of moving forward, you stay in places that no longer serve you, hold on to relationships that drain you, and remain in cycles that keep you from stepping into your purpose. The unknown is intimidating because it requires you to walk by faith and not by sight, to trust that even though you cannot see the full picture, God is still in control. Many people stay in situations far longer than they should, not because they are happy, but because they are afraid of what life will look like without them. They tolerate dysfunction because at least it is familiar. They put up with mistreatment because they have learned how to survive in it. They settle for less because stepping into something new would require them to believe in something greater. The fear of the unknown has a way of making comfort zones feel like safe places when in reality they are just cages. You tell yourself that staying in a job you have outgrown is the responsible thing to do, even though every day you feel unfulfilled. You convince yourself that remaining in a toxic relationship is better than being alone, even though deep down you know it is breaking you. You hesitate to pursue your dreams because you do not know if you will succeed, so instead you settle for a life that does not challenge you to grow. This is what fear does. It convinces you that it is better to remain stuck in the familiar than to step into the unknown, even when the unknown is where your destiny is waiting. The Israelites struggled with this fear after leaving Egypt. They had been enslaved for generations, crying out to God for deliverance, but when freedom came, they found themselves longing for what was familiar. They said it would have been better to die in Egypt than to die in the wilderness, because at least in Egypt they knew what to expect. Their fear of the unknown made them desire captivity over the uncertainty of freedom. That is how strong fear can be. It can make you crave what once broke you because at least it was predictable. It can make you think that going back to what God freed you from is better than trusting Him for something new. It can make you forget that if God brought you out, He did not bring you out to leave you stranded. He brought you out to take you somewhere greater. Fear of the unknown is dangerous because it creates false narratives. It makes you assume the worst about what is ahead. You start imagining failure before you even try. You start believing that things will fall apart before you even take the first step. You start expecting disappointment before you even see what God has in store. The enemy uses fear to keep you bound because he knows that as long as you are afraid to move forward, you will never fully walk in the purpose God has for you. Fear tells you that you are not ready, that you are not strong enough, that you do not have what it takes. And if you believe those lies long enough, you will stay in places that no longer have room for your growth. When God calls you to something greater, he rarely gives you all the details. He requires you to trust him beyond what you can see, beyond what makes sense, beyond what feels comfortable. That is why fear becomes such a battle, because faith and fear cannot occupy the same space. Either you will trust that God is leading you, or you will allow fear to convince you that staying where you are is safer. But safety is not the goal. Comfort is not the goal. Purpose is the goal. Destiny is the goal. Becoming who God created you to be is the goal. And you cannot become that person if you refuse to step into the unknown. Many people pray for change, but when the opportunity for change comes, they hesitate. They ask God to open doors, but when he does, they overanalyze instead of walking through them. They wait for signs, for confirmations, for absolute certainty before they move, but faith does not work like that. Faith requires you to step before you see. Faith requires you to believe before you have proof. Faith requires you to trust that even when you do not understand how everything will unfold, God is already working things together for your good. Fear of the unknown keeps you stuck because it makes you think you need to have all the answers before you take the first step. But the truth is, if you had all the answers, you would not need faith. God has a history of calling people into the unknown. He called Abraham to leave his homeland without telling him exactly where he was going. He called Peter to step out of the boat onto the water, even though it made no sense. He called the disciples to follow Jesus without knowing what their future would look like. Every great move of God requires an act of faith, and every act of faith requires trusting him beyond what is familiar. Fear will always try to convince you that the unknown is too risky, but the real risk is staying in a place that no longer grows you. The real risk is wasting years of your life playing it safe instead of walking in what God has called you to do. The real risk is looking back one day and realizing that you let fear talk you out of a life you were meant to live. Fear will always present itself when you are on the verge of something great, but you cannot let it paralyze you. You cannot let it convince you that staying where you are is better than stepping into where God is calling you. Fear of the unknown may be loud, but your faith has to be louder. Control is an illusion because no matter how much we plan, strategize, and prepare, life will always have unexpected twists and turns that we cannot predict or prevent. We try to hold on tightly to people, situations, and outcomes, thinking that if we can just manage every detail, we will be able to avoid disappointment, pain, or failure. But the truth is, control is not security, it is not peace, it is not stability. Control is exhausting because it forces us to carry burdens we were never meant to carry. It makes us believe that everything depends on us when in reality, everything depends on God. The more we try to control things, the more frustrated we become because life does not always go according to our plans. People change, opportunities shift, relationships end, doors close. And when we have convinced ourselves that we are the ones holding everything together, we break under the weight of trying to manage what was never ours to manage in the first place. There are things in life that no amount of control can fix. No matter how much you try to control other people, you cannot make them love you, stay loyal, or do right by you. No matter how much you try to control situations, you cannot force doors to open, relationships to work, or opportunities to last. No matter how much you try to control the future, you cannot guarantee that everything will unfold exactly how you envisioned. And yes, so many of us live in cycles of stress and anxiety because we are trying to force outcomes instead of trusting God's process. We hold on to people who are trying to leave because we are afraid of being alone. We cling to jobs that no longer fulfill us because we are afraid of stepping into the unknown. We try to manipulate situations to go our way because we do not trust that God's way is better. And in doing so, we create more frustration for ourselves because control is not sustainable. It is draining, it is limiting, and it is rooted in fear. Letting go of control does not mean being passive. It does not mean sitting back and doing nothing. It means releasing the need to force things to happen and trusting that God's plan is greater than our own. It means surrendering the illusion of control and embracing the reality that we are not God. We do not see the full picture. We do not know what is best in every situation. We do not have the ability to determine the outcome of every circumstance. And the moment we realize that we step into a freedom that control could never give us, we stop striving, we stop overanalyzing, we stop trying to make everything perfect. Instead, we move in faith, trusting that God is leading us exactly where we need to be. One of the greatest struggles of letting go of control is the fear of uncertainty. We think that if we release our grip, things will fall apart. We think that if we stop trying to control people, they will disappoint us. We think that if we stop obsessing over outcomes, we will be unprepared for what happens next. But what if releasing control is the very thing that allows things to fall into place? What if letting go is not losing but gaining? What if surrendering our need to manage every detail is what positions us to receive God's best? The more we try to control things, the more we delay the blessings that come with surrender. When we release control, we open ourselves up to possibilities we never imagined. We create space for God to move in ways we never expected. We free ourselves from the constant burden of trying to figure everything out and allow God to be God. Control often stems from fear. We try to control situations because we are afraid of being hurt. We try to control people because we are afraid of being abandoned. We try to control the future because we are afraid of failure. But fear is not meant to lead us. Fear is not meant to dictate our decisions. Fear is a liar that convinces us that if we do not have control, we will not be safe. But true safety is not found in control, it is found in God. True peace is not found in managing every detail. It is found in trusting that God already has every detail worked out. True joy is not found in forcing things to happen. It is found in knowing that what is meant for us will always find us in God's timing. Jesus modeled surrender when he prayed in the garden, "Not my will, but yours be done." If the Son of God, who had all power and authority, was willing to surrender to the Father's plan, how much more should we? Jesus could have chosen control. He could have avoided suffering. He could have changed the outcome. But he chose to trust that God's plan was greater, and because of his surrender, salvation was made available to all. What if the very thing you are holding on to is the thing standing between you and your breakthrough? What if the control you refuse to release is what is keeping you from your next level? What if the peace you are searching for is on the other side of surrender? God does not need our control. He needs our trust. He needs our obedience. He needs our willingness to step aside and let him do what only he can do. When we release control, we stop carrying burdens we were never meant to carry. We stop living in cycles of anxiety and frustration. We stop trying to manipulate outcomes and start embracing God's divine plan. We stop resisting and start flowing in the grace that comes with knowing that we do not have to have it all figured out because God already does. Healing happens when you stop reopening wounds by revisiting what broke you. Many people find themselves stuck in cycles of pain, not because healing is impossible, but because they keep going back to the very things that caused them harm. They replay old conversations, revisit past disappointments, and dwell on moments that shattered them. They struggle to move forward because their mind is still attached to what happened, who hurt them, and what they lost. But healing is not about reliving the past. It is about learning from it, growing beyond it, and deciding that it no longer has the power to define your future. The problem is that healing requires discipline. It is not just about time passing, but about making the intentional decision to stop picking at the scabs of old wounds. It requires the courage to say, "I will not allow this to control me any longer." It requires the strength to refuse to revisit what God has already called you to move beyond. Emotional wounds are like physical ones. If you keep touching them, they will never fully heal. If you keep going back to the pain, if you keep replaying the hurt, if you keep dwelling on the betrayal, you are not giving yourself the space to truly recover. You may think that by analyzing the past over and over, you will somehow make sense of it or change what happened. But the truth is, no amount of revisiting can alter the past. The only thing it does is delay your healing. Some people stay wounded not because they cannot heal, but because they refuse to release the very things that are keeping them in pain. They hold on to bitterness, replay offenses, and keep their hearts connected to people who have already moved on. They wonder why they are still hurting, but they do not realize that they are feeding the pain every time they revisit it. Healing requires distance from what wounded you. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. You cannot recover if you keep surrounding yourself with the same negativity, engaging in the same toxic relationships, or exposing yourself to the same destructive habits. Some people are waiting to feel better before they walk away, but healing does not happen in the middle of the dysfunction. It happens when you step away from it. Some people are holding on to memories, hoping that if they stay connected to the past, they can somehow rewrite it. But healing is not about rewriting the past. It is about embracing the fact that your future is worth more than your history. It is about deciding that you deserve to move forward, that you deserve to experience joy, and that you are no longer available to be held hostage by what hurt you. One of the reasons healing is so difficult is that pain often becomes a part of our identity. We become so familiar with our wounds that we do not know who we are without them. We build our lives around our trauma. We define ourselves by what we have been through. We cling to our pain because it is the only thing we have known for so long. But healing requires us to redefine ourselves. It requires us to see ourselves beyond our suffering. It requires us to believe that there is life on the other side of what happened. It requires us to be willing to let go of what is comfortable, even if that comfort comes from dysfunction. Some people do not heal because healing means they will no longer have an excuse to stay stuck. It means they will have to take responsibility for their joy, for their peace, and for their future. And that can be terrifying when all they have ever known is pain. Letting go of pain does not mean what happened did not matter. It does not mean that the hurt was not real. It does not mean that the betrayal was not deep. It simply means that you refuse to let it control your life any longer. It means that you choose to move forward instead of being trapped in the past. It means that you decide to stop revisiting the